World leaders will gather in Johannesburg for the historic G20 Summit from the 22nd of November. South Africa assumed presidency of the G20 on the 1st of December in 2024 under the theme Solidarity, Equality and Sustainability, and will hand it over to the United States in absentia. South Africa has described its presidency as being guided by three key policy priorities, being economic growth, climate change and sustainable development. But before the summit takes place, let's do a refresher of what the G20 is, its objectives, and we take a look at what South Africa's priority points should be going into this gathering. Development economist and Frontline Group CEO, Dr. Jason Musyoka, joins us this morning. Doctor, thank you so much for your time and for joining us today. So maybe let's just start off by defining how does the G20 influence global economic policies, and what are the benefits for member countries, especially for emerging economies such as South Africa?
Right, Katleko, thank you so much for having me. So the G20 started really in the late 1990s, specifically in September 1999, in response to, in the 1990s, there were a series of global crises that were emerging, not necessarily of a global scope, but of a regional scope that threatened global economic stability. But the specific response was the Asian crisis of the 1997-1998, where most of the Asian economies collapsed, and that largely was tethered on their failure of managing their macroeconomics. And this would be, of course, inflation and unemployment, currency and all of that. So with the response was essentially to try and contain the likelihood of regional crisis spreading to become a global crisis. And fast forward, at the time, I need to mention that in 1999, the start-off was really just among central bank governors and ministers of finance who were responsible for containing macroeconomic runaway in their respective countries. So that was how it was started. And fast forward to 2007, the threat of now a global crisis, it upgraded the G20 from just a meeting of ministers of finance or central bank governors to heads of state. And from there, of course, it's become now an annual meeting of heads of state who are deliberating on global stability.
And as they deliberate on global stability, I mean, South Africa assumed the G20 presidency at a very critical time when the world faces numerous challenges. What do you think are the key priorities that South Africa should focus on, especially during this presidency?
So it's very interesting because South Africa took over the presidency of the G20 during really globally tumultuous time. And if you look at particularly the tensions between South Africa and the US, but also the fact that we've moved, the key characteristic of the global economy at the moment is multipolarity. It's the fact that the center no longer holds as it was, and the US is no longer really as dominant as it was. So you have multipolarity in the sense of regions like BRICS and China also emerging, and European Union also asserting themselves. So because of that, the integration of the G20 is not really as it was, because there are tensions within the G20 itself. Keep in mind that there are 19 countries, US involved, South Africa involved, but then with two other regions, which is AU and the European Union. So because of that, you have parties that are on the table that are also pushing for their interests and guarding their regions, so to speak. So that being said, South Africa chose equality, solidarity, and sustainability, to answer your question directly. And I think that was very relevant in my assessment, because the Global South, which South Africa does represent well with the other BRICS countries, the question of equality is a major one. And Global South has been pushing for global equality on issues of security and climate change, and all of that, governance on a global level. So I think that that was a very relevant choice in my assessment. And then, of course, you have the question of sustainability, and you have thirdly the question of solidarity. Solidarity, of course, this giving the G20 agenda this year more social aspect. So again, very much linking to equality. So I think, in my view, in summary, the choice of equality, solidarity, and sustainability is very relevant, not just on a global level, but I think South Africa, which South Africa has really maintained the local, national, socio-economic challenges, locating those on a global context, going all the way back to 1999. So now the same issues that we are facing in the country have become global issues that South Africa is pushing for.
Doc, I mean, there have been criticisms from other parties saying such gatherings are simply just at a very high level, a gathering of people coming in and hosting talk shops. What does the G20 seriously mean for the ordinary Joe in the streets? So that being the working class, an informal trader on the streets, how does this gathering really impact on their day-to-day lives?
I think this is a case of public discourse, and there is no legislative authority for the G20. They're not able to make policies per se, but what they do, it is really sitting around the table to discuss on global issues that are guided by specific countries, in this case now South Africa. And so this is an opportunity for South Africa to advance its agenda. It's a bit interesting because it comes on the backdrop of the president visiting the US and the tensions around immigration, as we know, certainly in South Africa with Afrikaners migrating to the US. So those tensions occurring, and yet South Africa pushing back and insisting that equality and the question of solidarity and all of that need to be taken into account. So this is a case of public discourse. And public discourse moves slowly. Ideas move slowly. They don't travel too quickly, especially in our time now where you have both thesis and antithesis. By that I mean you have ideas that have been there, and then you have counter ideas that are pushing back against some narratives such as issues of migration and racism and all of that. So pushing back against those, you have opposition going on, and that means that the needle moves really slowly. But nevertheless, the impact is there in terms of the globe becoming more comfortable and more aware of the issues that matter to the global south. So again, Katleko, to answer your question directly on that, I don't think there is direct impact as far as the ordinary South African is concerned immediately, but over time you begin to see the change because the conversations that the ordinary South African would be worried about, which is employment and equality and all of that, are globalized, and they become easier to deal with on a national level if there is a global buy-in.
And I'm sure then the importance of inclusivity and just a broad engagement with civil society in order to bring forth the voices of those at grassroots level is quite important.
Certainly, and that is where the idea of discourse, South Africa now gathered quite a large number of, and because the presidency of the G20 allows countries to make choices of a number of other countries to invite, obviously South Africa would have invited countries, and there are quite a number. I saw that I think there are more than 15 countries that South Africa has invited. Those would be the same ones that would give you support in terms of your agenda. And that does go a long way in terms of, again, changing the conversation slowly. And perhaps in 10 years down the line, we could look back and suggest that things are different. Previously, the way it would have been is to, as I said in the beginning, it would be to focus on macroeconomic indicators. This would be employment and inflation and so on. But now we are dealing with a much broader issue because global issues are not just macroeconomic issues. We're dealing with energy, we're dealing with the climate change and all of that. So the broadening of the scope, perhaps one might argue might have slowed down the immediate impact that we would like to see, but nevertheless, there is impact that is coming. So I always argue that these multilateral organizations are like an aircraft. They turn slowly, but they certainly do turn, and the influence is felt farther down the line.
Speaking of those multilateral bodies, we've been having a lot of people, especially with those that were reacting to tweets and with regards to the USA not attending and boycotting South Africa. And now the anticipation is that they possibly will then ban South Africa from attending the G20 in the USA next year. We have a tweet from Dr. Musyoka saying that should other G20 members accept this, then South Africa should withdraw from this whole rubbish, as he refers to it, and rather concentrate on efforts such as BRICS. What's your take on that?
I don't think so. And I think also that the US cannot ban South Africa as part of the G20 because it does not admit South Africa into the G20. It's admitted by all the other members of the G20. So South Africa can choose not to go, but it cannot be banned along with any other country. That would set a very bad precedence for the G20 itself. But that being said, I think with regard to global conversations, Dr. Ntlosi's perspective might suggest it is a case where in terms of policy making, if you disagree with somebody, then run away from the table. And I don't think that is an approach that policy making need to follow. There are tensions and frictions and conflicts that arise, but in the process, there is a movement forward. I think it's a good thing that South Africa is part of G20. I think it's a good thing that it's part of BRICS. And remember, there are other countries that are equally facing the same challenge, not just South Africa, because Russia has had tensions with the US for a long time. Turkey, apart from recently, the same. And these are countries that are in the global south that have also asserted themselves and pushed their agenda. And South Africa needs to stay the course in terms of pushing the agenda for Global South, not just Global South, by the way, but as the only African country that is part of the G20 as the representative of the continent. So it's not just representing the interests of the Global South, but if you scale that down a little, then there is an agenda to push for, regardless of how difficult it is.
Lastly, Doc, and very quickly, do you think South Africa's presidency has been impactful? Do you think it'll leave a lasting legacy?
Without a doubt, for two reasons. One is because it's a voice of Global South, and it sustained what Turkey was pushing for in the last G20 presidency. And also, secondly, the fact that the US, because of its push for America First, it has actually amplified the G20. So it is one of those unintended consequences where the US's voice against the G20 has also, raised the bar for South Africa in the sense of publicizing the G20 itself and what it is focused on. And I think there will be impact even on a local level with conversations now cascading down to subnational levels.
All right, Dr. Musyoka, thank you so much for your time and giving us your insights.